Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. US President Donald Trump has announced an immediate end to all trade negotiations with Canada, accusing Ottawa of egregious behaviour over a political ad featuring Ronald Reagan criticising tariffs. Trump has also imposed a 35% levy on Canadian imports, with exemptions for goods covered under the USMCA trade deal. Trump will also meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea on October the 30th on the sidelines of the APEC summit. The White House has confirmed it will be the first face-to-face between the two leaders since Trump's return to office, as trade tensions rise over Washington's threat of 100% tariffs and Beijing's restrictions on rare earth exports. US President Donald Trump has dismissed efforts by Israeli lawmakers to advance legislation annexing the occupied West Bank, saying Israel is not going to do anything there. The bill, which would apply Israeli law to the territory claimed by Palestinians for a future state, won initial approval in the Knesset on Wednesday. Marco Rubio has warned that Israel's move towards annexing the West Bank could undermine President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. Speaking before departing for the country, Rubio said the president had made clear that such annexation is not something we'd be supportive of right now, calling the Knesset vote potentially counterproductive. The United Nations has called on Israel to allow more aid trucks through additional crossings into Gaza, saying current levels fall short of the ceasefire terms. Palestinians continue to face severe shortages of food and clean water, with many unable to return home amid an ongoing Israeli military presence. Argentine President Javier Milei urged supporters at a Rosario rally ahead of Sunday's midterms to seeking votes to sustain his austerity policies, economic reforms and Labour tax plans amid pressure from the US and slipping approval ratings. Lebanon's health ministry says 4 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes in the country's east and south. The IDF confirmed hitting targets linked to Hezbollah, saying the group had used the areas to plan attacks against Israel. Ivory Coast's President Assane Ouattara has urged voters to support him for peace and stability ahead of elections. The vote comes amid tensions with several rivals barred from running and growing calls for new leadership. Now this hour we start in North America, where US President Donald Trump announces that he is ending all trade negotiations with Canada, citing a Canadian television advertisement opposing US tariffs that he said distorted the facts and represented egregious behaviour aimed at influencing US court decisions on his tariff policy. This comes as Ontario's Premier, Doug Ford, promoted the disputed ad last week in a post on X, writing that Ontario's new advertising campaign in the United States has launched. His administration has imposed a 35% levy on many Canadian imports, as well as individual tariffs targeting particular industries like car and steel manufacturing, by which Ontario has been particularly hard hit. Although Trump has allowed exemptions for goods that fall under a free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada that he negotiated during his first term. We're now joined by Keith Vaz. He is a former UK minister and he joins us live from London to discuss this development further. Keith, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Keith, Canada is one of North America's top trading partners. and their relationship during Trump's term has been tumultuous. Mark Carney won an unprecedented election victory earlier on this year, standing firmly against Trump, and they were seen laughing in the White House together on multiple occasions now. But it has taken an advert with featuring former President Ronald Reagan making statements against tariffs to seemingly, some would say, punish a whole nation and completely put these negotiations to bed. Your thoughts, Keith, on this?
Good afternoon, or good morning from London, Thomas. I hope you enjoyed your trip to New York. We followed it with great interest here in London. Look, there's always going to be drama around the sayings of Donald Trump, and what he does on one day could easily be changed the next. I think what we found that in Canada and in Mark Carney, he seems to have discovered someone who can actually stand up to him. And he seems to have united the whole of the Canadian people against the Trump administration. So from that point of view, I think it's really important that one doesn't underestimate the ability of Canada to fight back. How strange it is that the United States would want to punish one of its allies, one of its friends, one of the people who it shares, one of the countries who shares a border with it, and whose peoples have got on together for centuries. They're about to start next year the World Cup, which is shared between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. I'm quite certain that this will be changed eventually, because Mark Carney is not the kind of prime minister that anyone can push around.
Yes, indeed. And as you've said, do you think this is the end of the negotiations, or do you think that, as Donald Trump says, it is not the end of these negotiations, in fact?
It's never going to be the end of the negotiations. This will go on for 4 years. For as long as President Trump remains in the White House, he will change his mind overnight, cause grief to the countries that are affected, and cause turmoil to the international markets. So from that point of view, I don't think it can be described as the end. He'll wait to see what... It's always the game of chess with him. He's a deal maker, so he'll want to know what kind of deal Mark Carney makes.
A 35% levy, how significant of that is a number, and how hard will Canadians be feeling that, Keith?
Any additional levy will cause hardship. It will, in a sense, disorientate the international trade carousel that exists, and make negotiations and deals between countries and leaders to be pointless. If you can change it overnight, what's the point of having a deal? And that is, I think, what lots of other countries have found. So of course it's going to cause hardship. But I don't think that Mark Carney and Canada will just stand aside and allow this to happen. They will do their best to take whatever action is necessary in order to protect themselves. And I'm sure that they will come up with their own particular activities, their own retaliation very shortly. What he's managed to do is actually ensure the election of Mark Carney. And if he had not said anything and done anything, I'm quite certain that Mark Carney would not have been elected. But Trump has made sure he has been, and now he's stuck with him for a period of 3 years. The world has got Donald Trump to deal with for now 3.5 years. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yes, and Keith, do stay with us as we next move over to Europe, where Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said that he is working to find a way to circumvent US sanctions on Russian oil companies. This comes after US President Donald Trump, a close ally of the Hungarian leader, recently imposed sanctions on Russia for the first time in his second term, targeting Lukoil and Rosneft, as he tries to pressure Moscow into agreeing a ceasefire in Ukraine. Trump's move drove up oil prices and left questions for Hungary and Slovakia, the biggest buyers of Russian oil in the European Union after securing exemptions from EU restrictions. Let's listen in to what Orbán had to say.
Többet, akár kétszeresét kell fizetnünk az olajért meg a gázért, akkor az embereknek sem tudjuk a mostani rezsicsökkentett áron továbbadni. Tehát aki rezsicsökkentést akar, annak meg kell védeni Magyarországnak azt a jogát, hogy az oroszoktól vásároljunk, vagy az oroszokéval azonos áron, vagy annál olcsóbban vásároljunk olajat és gázt. Ez a meccs nincs lefutva, valóban vannak most szankciók bizonyos orosz olajcégekkel szemben. Én azzal kezdtem a hetet, hogy a MOL vezetőivel többször is egyeztettem. Dolgozunk azon, hogy hogyan lehet ezt a szankciót kivédeni.
We're once again joined by Keith Vaz. Keith, what power does Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, an obvious outlier in the European Union, along with Slovakia, have when it comes to negotiating a way to circumvent these sanctions that were put on these Russian oil companies by the United States from Moscow?
Well, he's got a lot of goodwill with the Russian leader, and he's got a lot of goodwill with the American administration and Trump in particular. Remember, President Trump chose Hungary as the country that he was going to have his meeting with Vladimir Putin. This was where the summit was going to take place, the summit that never took place. So we have a problem. This is the problem for the Trump administration. This is when the circle becomes the square, because he wants to punish the Russians, and in punishing the Russians, he's going to be punishing the Hungarians and the Slovaks, two countries that have supported Trump and Russia. So it's going to be a real problem for them. India and China, of course, also affected. 80% of the oil that comes from these companies end up with China and India. I think what's going to happen is they will find other ways of getting this Russian oil. They're not going to stop importing immediately. They talk about suspending, etc., etc. But who's going to check where every single barrel of oil is going to go? The reason why America has such a hold is because, of course, people have to deal with dollars. And that's where BRICS was formed, an organization that exists to find different methods of paying. And now, of course, you have either a new currency or the ability of countries to deal directly with each other in their own currency. And BRICS is going to be very successful if it manages to break the yoke of the American dollar. So things have consequences. Every action has a consequence. Whatever we do, it's the first law of physics, and it's also the first law of politics. The second law being make sure you've got your numbers around the table. But he is in a difficult position now because he's hurting. He's going to hurt the very countries that support him. The two most supportive countries in Europe. He's going to alienate India, drive India further insanely mad about what's going on. I think that Prime Minister Modi has been amazing at keeping his cool. And he's going to alienate China. So, it's about America ruling the world, and it's not happening anymore. So this will have consequences.
And Keith, of course, Viktor Orbán's Hungary continues to isolate itself within the European Union. How do you see its future in the bloc?
Oh, Hungary's going nowhere. There's no question that Hungary needs EU money. It is not a net provider of EU funds. The countries that we cannot do without in the EU, I say we, Britain is no longer a member of the EU, is we couldn't really do without Britain, Europe, Britain, France, Germany, because they are net contributors. Hungary is not a net contributor to the EU. If Hungary goes out of the EU, it'll have all the problems that we've had in Great Britain. We now have a new party, the Green Party, doing very, very well, that is now pledging to take Britain back into the EU. And that's put them up to second in the polls. Hungarians do not want to come out of the EU. The Prime Minister may be irritated by the way in which they conduct their business. I was irritated when I was Minister for Europe at the way in which everyone goes around the table, says their little piece, but we all know this has been decided beforehand. So it is a very irritating organisation, very slow, very cumbersome.
Yes.
So Orban is not that kind of politician. So I would imagine that he will be on the phone to Trump asking him to change his mind.
Yes, Keith Vaz, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and have you on the programme. We now move over to the Middle East for our next story, where earlier today, Israeli protesters gathered near the Karim Shalom border crossing and attempted to block humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip. They said that their actions were in response to alleged ceasefire violations by Hamas. Let's listen in to what one of the protesters had to say.
אז ארגון צעדת האימהות וצו 9 הגיעו היום כדי לחסום מסעיות. אנחנו חוסמים את המסעיות של חולדות החמאס. חולדות החמאס שרמסו ודרסו את ההסכם והפרו אותו בכך שהם רצחו לנו 2 לוחמים בזמן של הפסקת אש. ואני מפה קוראת לראש הממשלה, תחזור להילחם בהם. לחימה עצימה, עזה, שבור להם את העצמות, להשמיד אותם. כמובן שלא להכניס להם את המסעיות. כיבוש, גירוש, התיישבות. בואו נדבר כבר בעברית. כיבוש, גירוש, התיישבות. זה הדבר...
This comes as the World Health Organization strongly stressed that aid to Gaza remains only a fraction of what is needed to rebuild the region's healthcare system. Additionally, the WHO chief has estimated that rebuilding medical infrastructure could cost at least $7 billion, even as humanitarian deliveries increase. In a separate development, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has arrived in Israel as part of a series of US officials visiting to support the Gaza ceasefire. Rubio has said that good progress is being made and expressed confidence in maintaining and expanding the truce. We are now joined by Peter Baum, the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, and he joins us live from London. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Peter, a lot of people will be seeing that and being quite angry about it. Of course, Hamas does not reflect the broader Gazan population. We know that 600 aid trucks are needed to get in a day, and only a fraction of that are getting into the Gaza Strip already under Trump's new peace deal. I think only 93 trucks out of this estimated 600 that are needed to reach that aim are getting in. What are your thoughts on this situation that Israeli protesters are blocking that very, very important Karem corridor into the Gaza Strip in response to an alleged Hamas breach of a ceasefire?
Hi, Thomas. Very good to be with you, and good afternoon to you from London. Couple of things I'd say on this. I've literally just got off the phone from a video call with some journalists and some people working for politicians for both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. And as we speak now, the crossing is being reopened. The protests, as far as I understand it, were not only about the Hamas breach of the ceasefire, but the slow pace of returning the bodies of dead hostages. And I gather, Thomas, that today, sometime before Shabbat comes in Israel, which will be in about 5 hours' time, the bodies of 2 hostages, dead hostages, will in fact be returned via the Red Cross. So I think the protest was a short-term one. As I say, the latest information I have is that the crossings will be opened, and the bargaining chip, I guess, was that Hamas would release 2 more bodies. So I don't think this particular issue, and it will probably happen again, Thomas, as we know, there will be protesters in a few days' time blocking the crossings, and they'll be reopened again. This is a game I hate to use that word, but that's what it is, we've come to expect. So not by any means a disaster for both sides, and in fact some good may come out of it for the Israelis as 2 bodies are released. On your broader question about aid trucks and the amount of delivery getting through, this is an ongoing story in which most impartial analysts are now suggesting that both the World Health Organization and the United Nations are losing credibility. And let me explain why. In those glorious days of a couple of weeks ago, when the world at large saw the joy on both sides of the Israeli hostages being released back to Israel and the Palestinian prisoners being released from Israeli prisons back into Gaza, we literally saw, Thomas, on our screens, thousands of Palestinians rejoicing at the return of their loved ones and their family members. And yet, Thomas, we had been told for months leading up to this that there was a dire famine in Gaza. Well, those thousands of prisoners, of people rejoicing in the streets of Gaza, weren't affected by a famine. So the number of aid trucks being suggested by the World Health Organization and the UN that needs to go into Gaza, to the world at large, seeing those pictures, was saying, well, hey, how much more needs to go in? The Palestinians seem well fed, although we saw rejoicing at the streets. So I think we have to take these stories, which will still continue to emanate from the global media, from the World Health Organization and from the UN, are really lacking credibility.
Peter, it's very, very hard to get any credible information from either side of that, due to the fact that Israel didn't let any foreign journalists into the Gaza Strip, of course. But Peter, unfortunately, we've ran out of time there. But thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And now we move over to the Indo-Pacific, where China's Commerce Minister Wang has said that China must strive for the balanced development of imports and exports. Wang has stressed that China will work to expand imports to support industrial transformation and upgrade, while also meeting the needs of its people's lives. Let's listen in.
我们要推动进出口平衡发展，也就是进口、出口的发展要平衡，加大力度扩大进口，既满足产业转型升级的需要，也满足人民美好生活的需要。
Talking further on the matter of trade and investment, China's Commerce Minister has vowed to create a more favourable environment to attract foreign investment and highlight plans for a transparent and stable business climate. Moreover, on the China-US trade consultations, he has said that both countries can resolve concerns through mutual understanding and fair dialogue, promoting healthy and sustainable economic ties. His comments come a day after high-level meetings on China's future policy priorities concluded in Beijing. The four-day closed-door meetings were held from Monday and involved senior officials, with discussions held on long-term strategies for the 15th five-year plan, which is set to start next year. Now let's turn to South America, where Argentine President Javier Milei addressed supporters at a closing campaign rally in Rosario on Thursday, urging them to back his administration in upcoming midterm elections, emphasising the importance of voter participation to sustain his government's agenda. Milei has reacted to the situation, and let's listen to what he said.
Retomamos a las elecciones de medio término como elecciones irrelevantes, en las que el resultado no definía nada más que la figura de política de turno. Eso es lo que les quiere hacer querer los políticos. Quieren fomentar la apatía, pero nosotros vamos a ir a darles vuelta a las urnas. Vamos a ganarle con toda la fuerza a la libertad.
Meanwhile, in Buenos Aires, province governor Axel Kisil, who is also a presidential candidate, on Thursday delivered a speech during a closing campaign rally ahead of Argentina's midterm elections and criticised President Javier Milei's government and foreign economic influence in Argentina. Anek Kilikov has reacted to the situation. Let's listen in to his statements.
¿Y qué dice Trump? Esto no es para beneficiar a la Argentina. a confesión de esto no es para beneficiar a la Argentina. Y dijo a la periodista, le dice, Milei es mi amigo, Milei lo quiero, Milei me gusta, no sé qué cosa personal, dice, pero no le hagan creer a nadie que está haciendo las cosas bien. Lo dice Trump. Lo dice Trump. Lo dice Trump presionado porque al contribuyente, al famoso contribuyente norteamericano, no le da la menor gracia que 20.000 palos del gobierno norteamericano vengan a sostenerle la timba, besen a Caputo, a Milei o al que sea.
Now we move on once again. Now, Tropical Storm Melissa is moving slowly across the Caribbean, bringing heavy rain and strong winds to several islands. Jamaica, Haiti and parts of the Dominican Republic are under storm and hurricane warnings as officials urge residents to stay prepared. Forecasters say Storm Melissa could strengthen rapidly over the weekend, fueled by unusually warm ocean waters, and may reach Category 4 intensity by next week. Authorities in Jamaica have placed hospitals on emergency alert and are preparing to close airports if conditions worsen. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching for more world news here on NewsX World.